In the run-up to possible conflict with Syria, the question is on many people's minds, what is it that is so special about chemical weapons? What is it that is so terrifying or such a threat about using chemical weapons in warfare? Now, many people, many very intelligent people, like Jimmy Dore on the Young Turks last week, was saying, well, what does it really matter if you die from a chemical weapon or from a conventional weapon? If you die from sarin gas or if you're shot or a bomb is dropped on you? And there is certainly a case to be made that death is death, and it doesn't really matter what it is that killed you. And yet I'm going to lay out the case that I believe there is a big difference. And whether or not we use this difference to justify an attack on Syria, I think it is important that we understand the historical context that leads us to be more scared of certain weapons than of others. So we've got a quote here. This is from Michael Luhan of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. He says about chemical weapons, and in sarin gas in particular, they've become weapons of terror. You put yourself in a position where you're in your neighborhood and suddenly, without knowing anything, without smelling anything, seeing anything, people's eyes bug out. They start gasping for breath and hyperventilating, going into convulsions. You don't know what the hell's going on. And when you add to the fact that usually these are used against civilians who don't understand the threats that are being employed against them, you can understand psychologically why chemical weapons are so scary. Now, when we think back to the history of chemical weapons, the use in World War I, World War II, we're talking about things like chlorine gas, mustard gas, occasional sarin use. Now, on through the 40s, through the 60s, it was still used in some limited engagements. After that point, it was mainly Iraq, Iran, Iraq using them against the Kurds. And so up until just about 25 years ago, they were still being used. And yet we've been trying to ban them as a planet, I suppose, since the very late 19th century. I think the first ban was in 1899. There was an international treaty that was attempting to ban asphyxiating or deleterious gases. Important note, the United States refused to sign that at that time. And at that point, back in World War I and World War II, the impure chemical weapons that they were using at that time, you have the picture of yellow or green smoke or things of that sort. But that's not what we're talking about in modern usage. Most of the time, we're talking about an odorless, tasteless, and invisible gas. And so a bomb drops in your town, a shell drops, a rocket hits, and all of a sudden people around you are dying. And speaking about the psychological fear of this, we have Charles Blair of the Federation of American Scientists. He says that even after 85% of the world's stockpile of chemical weapons has been destroyed, which is unprecedented in the history of arms control, most of the world retains a hardwired fear of a weapon that not only is indiscriminate, but especially in the form of the newest agents, nerve agents in particular, can kill in minutes without the victim hearing, seeing, feeling, or smelling the gas. And also bear in mind that one important distinction between these chemical weapons and conventional arms, like missiles, like bombs, like bullets, and things of that sort, is that for the most part, those conventional weapons kill instantly. Yes, sometimes people are maimed by them, but generally they kill. Whereas things like mustard gas, chlorine gas, they don't necessarily kill everyone that they affect. They can afflict them with horrible chemical burns, can fill up their lungs with blood or other fluids, giving them the feeling of drowning. And so it maims as opposed to killing in many cases. Sarin obviously is somewhat more deadly. Now, beyond just how horrible the weapons are and the psychological impact that has, one of the reasons that we have this red line when it comes to the use of chemical weapons is that the important distinction is that they are not that useful in general terms in a military sense. And when I say that, I mean that one military using it on the military forces of another country. Conventional weapons tend to be more effective. They're not influenced by wind and things of that sort. But some of them can be canceled out just by using a gas mask, for instance. And so for the most part, chemical weapons are not very effective in terms of attacking the armed forces of another country. They are, however, incredibly effective at attacking the civilians of another country. That seems to be their natural home, is attacking dense urban areas and killing those who don't know how to defend themselves, civilians. And that's what's so scary about them. Now, when one country contemplates the use of chemical weapons, they're also thinking about, will they be used on me? And if one country attacks another with chemical weapons, we can expect that retaliation in kind will happen. We need to make sure that that does not happen. Now, the way that we make sure that that does not happen is having these treaties, but the treaties are useless without some sort of force, the threat of force at least, being used if you go against the treaty. Now, we have Syria. Now, you can look at the numbers where we're talking about people somewhere between 200, possibly over 1,000, that's the number that President Barack Obama is using, have died in the Syrian regime's use of chemical weapons in this case. And it's easy to say, well, 100,000 people have died. from conventional weapons. So what does it really matter if 1,000 have died from chemical weapons? And you need to understand, we are not just trying to stop the use of chemical weapons in the future of Syria attacking its rebels. Now, that's obviously horrible. What we're thinking about is the future of warfare. And if a much larger scale, possibly even world war, broke out in the future, then we're not talking about 100 people, we're not talking about 1,000 people. We're talking about the potential indiscriminate use of chemical, biological, and other sorts of weapons of mass destruction used on populations that could stretch into the hundreds of thousands or possibly even millions. And so it might seem like launching some sort of attack on Syria it seems out of the blue when you're talking about seemingly limited use of chemical weapons. Certainly, as a percentage of the number of civilians killed, it's a very small percentage. But you have to understand that America, that Barack Obama, and some of the other Western countries are not looking at it in terms of this one action. It's that we have had an unprecedented ban on certain types of weapons that historically the world has never seen anything like this before. You did not limit people's use of certain weapons 1,000 years ago. And we were trying to keep this relatively humane employ of weapons in the future. And the only way to do that is by attacking those who go against those conventions. Now, should we attack Syria? That's a different question. I'm not laying out the case for attacking Syria here. What I'm doing is laying out some of the psychological and historical reasons that chemical weapons are considered distinct from conventional weapons. But feel free to let me know what you think.